Welcome to the Hunting Beast Report, a live video podcast with Dan Infalt and host Jeremy Gillespie.
Today's podcast is brought to you by Stealth Outdoors. The off-season's a great time to rehab your gear, so head on over to Stealth Outdoors at www.stealthoutdoors.com to pick up some climbing stick wraps, cam buckle covers, platform cable wraps, or stealth strip rolls for all of your miscellaneous silencing needs. Today's show is also made possible by Hunting Beast Gear, innovators in mobile hunting gear and the designers of the Beast Sticks and Beast Stand. Check out the latest products at www.huntingbeastgear.com. And now, on to the podcast. All right, welcome back, everybody. Today we're live. We got special guest Eric Jeske, Dan Infalt as always, and Ashley Covert from Ashley Outdoors. How's everybody doing tonight?
Good. How are you doing?
Great.
Good.
Good. Well, how'd the weekend treat you guys? I heard you had a bit of an adventure.
Yeah, we scouted for one of the guys on the private channel, on the membership channel. We only had like it's still pretty small. We only had like 5 or 6 people make requests, and one of them seemed like a good fit. So me and Eric ran up and scouted it. That was pretty interesting. I had a good time. I think the person that, I don't want to say his last name, I don't know if he wants to be private or not, but Andy, he seemed to have a really good time. He seemed to enjoy it. And it laid out exactly like we thought it would. And the bucks were in a real small, tight area. And it was like a lot of pressure around the outside. And we got in there, no sign of anybody or anything. What'd you think, Eric?
Yeah, I thought it was really productive day bringing Andy out there and looking at the piece of property that he wanted to take a look at. He was hunting a ridge that was near a wet area, and he was so far out of the game. It was kind of unbelievable. But we brought him into where we thought these bucks would be, and sure enough, that's where they were. But it was fun to bring Andy through and put it into perspective, you know, where he needs to be hunting. And quite literally, where he was hunting and where we took him, I mean, we were 3/4 of a mile away from each other. So I think we really put him into the game, and I think he took a lot of understanding from what we did with him that day.
Yeah, he's a smart dude. What was interesting is when we were pulling in, you remember what I said? I looked at this ridge. There's this pristine ridge when you get off the road down this logging road a little ways. And you get in like a couple hundred yards and you just see this ridge, and it's all oaks, and everything else is like swampy bottom, low stuff. And I'm like, that is a hunter trap. And he kind of gives me a look. I'm like, that's where every hunter would go. And he goes, that's where I was hunting. And he goes, and you're right. All the hunters were up there. I kept having people walk underneath me. You know, you see garbage, you see tree stands, and yeah.
Yeah, and he did.
Where we went, we didn't see any people except for one spot we saw a camera, and it wasn't even in the swamp. It was on the perimeter.
Yeah, he did say when we were in the wet area, he did say numerous times, and I recall this. He said, I can't believe the lack of human sign here. Mm-hmm. He said that a few times, you know, as opposed to where he was hunting on the ridge.
Yep.
So that was pretty cool because, like I said, I think he took a lot away from it. And it's hard to watch a video and understand what somebody is doing. But, you know, boots on the ground, that changes the whole perspective.
Well, guys, today we're going to talk about taking road trips. But before we do that, Dan, if somebody, a member or somebody's interested in reaching out to you for that kind of service, how would they do that?
I kind of quit doing that. So basically, I used to charge like, I don't know, it was $500 for a day to do that. And it got overwhelming. I mean, people wanted me to do it every day, and it was hard. I got to have my own time for scouting and stuff, but I still want to do it sometimes. And the reason I took Andy out is because on the members only channel, we're going to pick some people. Andy didn't have to pay us. He went for free. We just randomly pick people and do that. Just like when we do the mapping, we're going to randomly pick somebody and map their property, do a map scout with them on a show like this on that channel. So, yeah, I'm not really doing it for money right now.
Okay. Well, back to the topic at hand, we're going to talk about out-of-state planning, logistics, lessons learned, things like that. So let's get started. We'll start with Eric. Where are you planning to hunt other than your home state this year? And Eric, you're from Wisconsin, right? For people that don't know, where are you planning to go, and why did you pick those areas?
So I am wanting to get to Nebraska and Kentucky. These are both hunts that, Dan and I kind of are planning together. And that's where we had decided to go this year. It's kind of fun when you go on a trip out of state, if they have a friend along, and bounce ideas off of each other and kind of scout together a little bit. So that's why I had chosen those states. Otherwise, I kind of wanted to get into Minnesota a little bit, which I had never hunted. But Kentucky is one that I have hunted before on my own. So I have, a little experience there. And that's a state that I've always wanted to get back to. And fortunately, it sounds like that's where we're going to be ending up this year.
Dan?
So I don't have anything going on in September, so I chose Nebraska. And the reason I took Nebraska with Eric is that in Nebraska, they opened September 1st. And that isn't even a done deal because you got to apply this year. So we got to draw yet. That's still upcoming. But we hope to draw. And when we do, that first week of September, I got nothing else going. But we did have to make a decision there because we both had talked and weighed out whether or not to go do a do-it-yourself bear in the non-quota area of Minnesota. That was on the table. And the other thing on the table was to go to New Hampshire and whitetails and Sitka deer. New Hampshire, just the economy's dropping out, and I'm really getting a budget crunch right now. So I just didn't want to spend the money to travel all the way out to do something new. And I'm wanting to see a little bit more kills on the show. And Nebraska, we did last year. We mapped out some really good stuff. And like usual on these road trips, you go in and you hunt these spots for a week, and you find these spots by ruining these spots. And you're like, oh, if I came back again, this is how I do it. Trouble is I never go back. So we're going to start trying to go back to some of these places so that we at least get a kill out of it. And me and Eric both got some spots where we know there's a pretty good likelihood there's going to be a good buck in there again this year, and we can get right on it. So that's why I chose Nebraska, or we chose it. I didn't chose that on my own. Me and Eric both had discussions about it, and we chose that together. And then Kentucky kind of came out of the blue because and please forgive me because I wasn't prepared for this, but the guys in Kentucky were they run a military veterans thing, and they get vets into hunting to keep them from having social issues and stuff, because hunting is just good for everybody. I mean, it saved me. It kept me out of drugs and crazy wildlife when I was younger. I think it straightens a lot of people out that have issues one way or another. So they came to me and they said a lot of their vets were asking if they could have me attend there this year, which is a little funny because I am not a vet. I've never been in the military and don't want to be. But I do very much so appreciate those people. And I was hee-hawing around. I was kind of, I don't know. And then they asked if they'd call and talk to me. When they talked to me, I couldn't say no. And we decided to go down there. And they got me some clearance to film because we're going to be on a military base. And it should be a fun time. And I think we haven't decided yet, but I think me and Eric might even stay a little longer than what they're doing this event for. But that's in October. And then I drew a Kansas tag. Eric's not involved in that. He didn't get the points that I had. So I applied for that with Ricky Poo and with the other Dave that you hardly ever see on the channel because he's got a very busy life. So the three of us will go to Kansas. And that was Dave really egging me on to go down there. I hunted Kansas once before many, many, many years ago. But Dave is from Kansas, lived in Kansas most of his life, moved up here and still works in Kansas, but he works from home. But every now and then he's got to go into the office. So he drives to Kansas. So when he goes down there, he spends a week down there scouting. And he basically did the footwork for us and went through every public property that's on it in Kansas. I mean, he's been scouting his ass off all spring. And he came back with reports of where the biggest, highest rubs were, which ones had the best bedding cover, where, which ones looked like they had pressure, which ones didn't look like you could really hunt unless you stalked them in open terrain. And we came up with a good plan and put our apps in, and with a couple of points, we drew. So that's the plan for now. Other stuff could come up. I mean, I could tag out right away in Wisconsin and Nebraska or something and say, okay, now I'm sitting here in September with nothing to do. Let's run to New Hampshire. I don't know what we're going to do. And if I'm tagged out in late season, me and Eric might run up to the UP. We do a lot of trips haphazard. Eric will call me and say, I'm bored. And I'll go, yeah, let's go to Nevada. we'll just jump in a truck and go, so we're a little weird that way.
Yeah. And then Ashley, what do you got planned for this fall?
So we're for sure hunting West Virginia, public land. And then we are I have never hunted Ohio. Justin has. So we are going to try and hunt Ohio this year. And I'm pretty pumped about that because the deer size is quite a significant difference. So I think it'll be fun.
I heard we got a mutual acquaintance too, George Hamrick.
Oh yeah, that is my husband's cousin.
Yeah, George is a great hunter. If anyone would like to check out, I did a podcast with George on my channel a while back, and he's put down some really good bucks in Ohio. So if that's going to be your tour guide or the person you bounce knowledge off, you guys will be in good hands.
Yeah, we went out scouting with him for a bit, and it's beautiful out there. There's so many spots that looked promising, and yeah, it's exciting because he has laid down a few decent bucks. So I'm pumped for it.
Well, that should be fun. And then real quick for me, I drew the elk unit that I prefer in Montana, which isn't a guarantee. So I decided not to put in for anything else out of state. So I've got my Montana elk tag, which is super exciting. Then I got a mule deer, whitetail, one or the other tag. And then this week, archery antelope results come out, and that's a real high odds draw. So hoping I draw that again. Got one last year. So like that hunt that's turned out to be a lot of fun. So Dan, everybody, let's jump into the topic here. And one thing I wanted to get started on, I feel like it's important for everybody, especially people that are new to travel, and just get everybody's thoughts on it, is I think it's real important to enjoy the whole experience and not just be outcome oriented. And it's easy in today's day and age to, to base the success of your trip on whether or not you tag an animal. So, Dan, let's start off with you. Give me your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because what me and Eric do a lot is we choose areas that most people wouldn't. And both of us are of the same mindset, which makes it perfect. Because there aren't very many people with this mindset, but we like challenges. So we like to take hard places. Now, there's some good and bad things about that. So, I mean, we'll go to places where, like the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, where your odds of getting a good buck are pretty slim, or other places similar to that. But the reason we do that is just because we like going to places that are popular hunting places for local people and just prove we can do it in those places. And for me, shooting a mature buck or a good buck for that area is just as good as shooting a giant buck in Iowa, because it still takes the same amount of skill, it takes the hard work, and it's still a mature buck. So when you put yourself in those hard places, it's hard to come back out successful, especially if you go there blind, especially in high population hunter areas. As you see, every time I go to Iowa, I kill a nice buck. I get several opportunities. But you go to the UP, you don't get so many opportunities, which is why you don't see every YouTuber going up to the UP hunting.
Right. None of them. Maybe you guys. Right. That's about it. Yeah.
But the dilemma with that is first off, to answer your question, is I'm perfectly fine with not killing a deer. I've proved I can kill deer. For me, it's the adventure. It's the seeing new places. It's going to a place I've never been before looking at a spot on the map, going in there and investigating it, finding the spot, figuring out who the buck is, whether you kill him or not. It's the chess match. But that's me personally as a hunter. And the struggle within me is that you need to make some kills to really get, a channel going and make some money off of it and stuff like that. And I do want to make some money off my channel. So that's a little bit of a dilemma, but I don't want to be fake either. I don't want to start doing things just for a channel. I want to do it because I hunt. But we are going to try doing a couple spots like Nebraska where we go back the year after and hunt the spots that we have figured out and see how that works out for a little more success,
Sure. Then Eric?
Yeah, I mean, I basically ditto what Dan said, but for me, it really is about, and once again, to say what Dan had mentioned already, I don't have to come out with a kill. I'm completely content with that. For me, it is sitting in a tree, whether it's I don't see any deer. I like being out in nature. That's my escape. Of course, a kill is a huge bonus. That's what I'm out there for. But there's some sort of mystique going into a new area, and especially big woods for myself, where you're out there with, wolves, bears in my scenario, and, in the UP is a good example, and just trying to break that piece of property down and figure it out. And I just like getting into area, and it's a brand new puzzle to me, basically. It's not a puzzle that I've put together already. It's something brand new. If you go hunt the same spot every single day, I mean, you get bored of it, right? So I just like getting into new places. That's what hunting is for me. I like the simplicity of it, and that's what I enjoy most about hunting.
And then when you watch people's channels, like if you follow people, I've noticed a lot of the YouTubers that do travel hunts, they go to the same spots and they kill bucks out of the same trees year after year, and that gets boring. It gets boring for everybody. It's got to get boring for them. It gets boring for the viewers. I think that mindset that me and Eric have of traveling all over the place and trying things, you're always learning. You're always up against a new challenge. It's kind of like the guy who hunts 5 stands and rotates through his 5 stands his whole life. If he's on an excellent property, he can still kill good bucks. But what the heck is he learning? How's he advancing? I'd get super bored. To me, that wouldn't even be hunting. That'd be killing, So it's just a mindset that we're wired a little different than most people.
Yeah, and I think just to touch on something there, Dan, the hunting public, there's a reason the public land challenge was super popular across the whole mobile hunting demographic. People want to see that stuff. They want to see guys in tougher environments challenge themselves. And I think that's why what you do resonates with people too, because exactly like I said, you're going to the UP, you're going to tough spots and not just rut hunts and premium land and premium areas. So, well, let's talk about prep work. We'll start with Eric. And I had some topics here, so just touch on any or all of these. Spring scouting, scouting, what happens when you get to an area and things go wrong? What are you doing to research like the wind in the area? And are you calling biologists, game wardens? Give me your prep work before you ever get to the area you're going to hunt.
Yeah, I'll just do a real quick breakdown of what I do to prepare for an out-of-state hunt. Number one for me is map scouting. That's a big thing. What does access look like? Are there any obstacles? Is there water to cross? Is it long distance where other hunters can't, easily gain access? I kind of am looking for those places. So that's kind of number one for me. Number two, I probably lack a little bit in. I should probably be better at this. I should call the local biologists. I should call the local wardens, see if I can gain any knowledge. For example, last year, Dan and I in Nebraska, we were stopped by a warden, and he wanted to check our licenses. We showed our licenses, but we got into a good conversation with that warden. We started asking questions, and he ended up being a wealth of knowledge. He told us about this spot and that spot and helped us out any way he could. So that was very beneficial for us. And then next, I'll probably look at the weather. Not so much, is it going to rain? What is the temperature going to be? But I like to look at the wind conditions. in those wind conditions are going to come into play with, spots I have picked out on the map. And you get into a scenario, hill country, everybody kind of knows that, wind can do anything in certain instances. But I like to have an idea of what that wind is going to do. Is it going to be at east all week? Is it going to be all over the place all week? Because that'll kind of, determine where I want to be on a different property. And then lastly, I think about gear a little bit. I myself, and I am a minimalist a little bit. I think about my stand, I think about a bow, and I think about a compass. Beyond that, my way of thinking, I feel like anything more than that, it kind of interferes with my thought process and the way I go about hunting. Of course, water and other things, but I try to keep it as simple as possible because my organizational skills are not perfect with hunting, and it really confuses me when I start thinking about my rangefinder and this and that and everything else. I just don't do well with it. So I try to focus on the main things that you need to kill a deer, and that's really all that matters to me.
How about you, Dan?
When I prepare for out-of-state hunt, and I'm sure Eric can back me up on this, there's this whole process I have. It's about 15 minutes before I leave, I run upstairs and find a pair of pants that ain't too dirty. I throw them in there as an extra pair. I try to find a pair of underwear that ain't too dirty and an extra pair of socks, just in case I get wet, or I get so sweated up that the guys are complaining about how bad I stink. And then if I find a jar of pickles around or something, I'll throw that in there too. And then we hit the road, and then I'm figuring out where to go as I go. No, really, there isn't a lot of preparation for me, but I think there should be. And the reason there isn't is because I live a hectic lifestyle. It's really hard for me to find time to do anything. Usually just before a road trip, I'm hunting my butt off, so I don't have time to look at stuff. And if I look at maps, say 2 months in advance, I ain't going to remember anything because I'm looking at maps every day. So just prior to going, I will try to find some time. And about the only time I have time is if I sit down at work and spend a work day while I'm, supposed to be running machines, looking at maps. And then I'll map some spots out on some properties, but I will also make some phone calls. I've found that biologists and DNR wardens and stuff can be hit or miss, and some of them won't help you. I've been in some places where they tell me if I helped you and I helped everybody kill all the deer. And I've had some that are real helpful. As Eric said, that warden that stopped us, the first thing he wanted to see was our license. And as soon as we showed him our license, he said, "Where are you guys from? How you hunt? You're hunting deer? You travel? You got a YouTube channel? That's cool. Here's where you're going to find the big bucks. This property here." And Eric says, "Well, I looked at this property here." And we're talking about a property that was like 100 miles away. And he goes, "Oh yeah, I've been to that property. My friend hunts there, and that's a good property. And here's where you want to go over there." And, if you can get in the right people, it's not like, they're going to tell you exactly where the deer is, but if they tell you an area where mature deer live, it gives you a huge advantage of at least you're going in knowing you had high probability of finding a deer. Because a lot of times when you're traveling on these trips, you get into spots and you get back there and you can't find any sign of a big buck, and you find a ton of pressure. It is weird because some properties, looking at a map, you'd think nobody would be there, and there's a ton of people there. And some of them you think there'll be a ton of people there and there's nobody there. And you really don't know if you go into a whole new state what you're going to run into, so a little bit of insight from somebody out there that knows something is probably a good thing, So I will, if I know somebody from that area or from that state, I might call them up and say, "Well, what do you think about this area? You ever check out any of these public properties?" I do find you have to know somebody pretty good, or they're not going to tell you they're, the properties that hold the best bucks.
Sure.
But if you get into areas or something, I don't necessarily even want to know the property, but what area of the state, what counties, are better per se. Mostly I'm looking at pressure because I want to get into places that I can get away from people. I can find good terrains. Another thing I'm looking for is you can get on properties that are too complex. And what I mean by that is it would take you a month to figure out all the bedding areas in there and stuff. They're just too complex. Or you can get in an area that's very big and has a few good spots in the center and go right past everybody to those good spots, check them out and hunt them. And those are a lot easier on road trips. So picking the right properties and really thinking about, what is it going to take to get into this property and look at this stuff and how much time is it going to involve? When you got a week, I mean, like Nebraska last year, we really wanted to experience the state. We spread out, and I think we pretty much hunted the whole entire state. We covered hundreds and hundreds of miles. I mean, I can't believe the amount of miles I put on the truck and stuff. I mean, it was literally crazy. But that really, in doing that and looking at hunting right on the Iowa border one day, and the next day hunting central Iowa up by the sand hills or whatever, and then back to the other end the next day, the amount of travel doing that, you're not scouting. You know what I mean? You're not working. You're not reading maps. You're just staring at a road. So really, picking an area and concentrating, it would have been a lot better on that trip. Or 4 days here, 4 days there. But part of the problem was we had, 4 people that wanted to hunt 4 different areas really bad and kind of stuffed together. So that made us travel more. And then we had locked into a bed and breakfast. I don't think locking into a place is a good thing, because then we were kind of locked there for, this is where we're going to stay. And then if you want to hunt this property over here, you have to drive there. And if it's 100 miles, it's 100 miles, or it's 200 miles, it's 200 miles. And that's a 400-mile round trip. So it was, that I learned some lessons there a little bit. Not that I didn't already know them, but I just tried pushing my luck, I guess.
Yeah, Dan, you stole my tip, and this doesn't work in every state, but out west where you have bigger, less populous areas, obviously Montana, Wyoming, the Dakotas, I purposely look for areas that don't have a hotel or Airbnb or very few amounts, because for the exact reason you said, if it's a 100-mile one-way drive from some place with amenities and a place to stay, the odds of getting heavy hunting pressure there are a lot lower. So I kind of seek those areas out, and maybe that's not the best area in the state as far as trophy quality or something, but you can almost guarantee those areas are going to be the best for low pressure. Yeah,
I also look for, in the same mindset, farm country that doesn't have very many towns or cities, because farmers hunt on their own farms. The people that work on the farms hunt on those farms, and then the public land that's out there hardly gets hunted. But if you put it right next to a huge city or a huge town or something, all the people from that town that live in little shacks are going to come out there and hunt.
Well, let's talk about saving money, because we had a kind of funny conversation before we got in line about this, Dan. We said, we can have both sides of the debate like we did with the trail cameras last week. Yeah. So I'm cheap. I like to save money, but partly it's because if I save money, I can hunt more. So that's the way I look at it. So one of the things we were just talking about, and I'll start here. I sleep in my truck a lot, like all the time. I don't even have a tent or even a camper. Like I'll sleep in my passenger seat like a homeless person. But I've gotten used to it, so that's fine. And one of the other things I do, like if I'm traveling out of state, is I like to make a couple meals in advance for 2 reasons. One, saves you money, like lasagna or something that you can microwave that tastes good and it'll last you a couple days. Because I don't know about you, but the last thing I want to do in November after I've hunted 12 hours and sat in a stand is come spend an hour cooking food. And if you go out every night, that can get expensive. So that's one of my tips, save you some money, is cook your food in advance and make a Walmart trip instead of going to the gas station every time. So Dan, you said you prefer the opposite. What's going on with you?
Well, I got a similar routine. I like to save money too, so we only eat at Bob Evans instead of Red Lobster.
Yeah, there you go.
The other way you save money, Dan, is by not changing the oil on your truck.
That is true.
I don't recommend that one.
Hit the cancel button.
Yeah, I was doing that today. But I spend way too much money hunting, and that's got to change because money's starting to crunch now. But I mean, that Nebraska hunt, I think I dropped over $3,000 easy, just without the tags, just driving around and eating and rooms. I actually rented a bed and breakfast, and then I rented it for a town. I looked up where I wanted to hunt, and then I rented a bed and breakfast in that town. and found out the town and the hunting property were like 300 miles apart.
Oh boy.
So I canceled it and then rented another room and ended up having to pay for the one I canceled it because of the way they did things. They told me they'd cancel it and refused to. After the fact, they charged me for it. So I had two hotels across the country, or not hotels, bed and breakfasts or whatever you call them, across the state. Didn't even stay at one that I paid for 10 days. And
oh geez.
yeah, it was crazy. We spent so much money eating and running around and stuff. But you know, I don't want to spend a ton of time making food. I mean, if it's something quick like dehydrated meals or something that you add water to, I mean, that's great. I mean, that's a great way to save money. But if you're going to sit down, you're going to fry steaks and stuff like that and cook over a grill or whatever, that can take up a lot of time. I guess you can do it after dark. But, you know, on the road, when we go into a hunting parking lot and we've been driving half the day or whatever, it is nice to just pull out, you know, one of those jet fuel things and heat up some water and pour a meal in there and eat it. It might not be the tastiest thing. It might not be like when we eat at Red Lobster on some of these trips, but but it's it gets you through the day and it keeps you hunting, you know. So yeah, I do agree with that. I usually do not take food into the trees with me. I'll take a water if it's really hot. Like Nebraska last year was 110 average. It was insanely hot, so you had to have water. And you necessarily didn't really have to. You just had to drink water before you went out there. But I did take a water on those trips because we were walking long ways in open sun and stuff. But generally, the more time you can spend hunting and the less time eating, preparing meals, or traveling, the better. And it kind of goes hand in hand. You get more hunting by not spending all that time doing that stuff. But those quick freeze-dried meals, I'm really starting to enjoy those.
What about you, Eric?
We do need to improve on that, Dan. Bread and sandwich meat and that kind of thing would go a long way in a cooler with ice, and it's so simple, and it takes 2 minutes to make. You know, maybe that's something we discuss a little further, but as far as saving money, I read with Dan. He spends all the fuel money. That's all that works.
It would be kind of hard to completely do without the restaurants because they're so fun.
Yeah.
In Nebraska, we were eating in this little, and what we really do, you know, if we're honest, is we like to find those little mom and pop restaurants, you know, and we found one in Nebraska, and you go in there and all the old farmers are in there and they're all chit chatting. And we sit down and I got some pancakes with my breakfast, and I start putting sugar on them, you know, a coating of sugar. And Eric liked that. He's like, that kind of tastes good. And so he starts putting sugar on his, and all of a sudden you hear in the background, those Wisconsin people are putting sugar on their pancakes. And also you can hear us about, do Wisconsin people eat pancakes? You just hear it in the silence of this place, right? It was great. And then while they're all just staring at us while we eat, and it felt like we were in some sci-fi thing, right? This truck comes flying into the parking lot with a gas hose hanging out of the gas thing, with some guy chasing, going, hey, takes his gas pump and leaves, and that got all the people riled up. That was fun.
Why is it not on film?
It should be. Remember, I was mad about that. I was like, we should have filmed that.
Yeah.
You know, Dan, you hit on a good point there, and I think not to be overlooked. When things aren't going your way on an out-of-state hunt, something like going out to a restaurant, it can be a good morale booster, get your head back in the game.
Yeah. You know, a lot of times, too, if you're staying in a tent and stuff and it's kind of nasty weather out and stuff, too, it's hard to talk or gameplay or anything. You go in a restaurant, have a little meal and get some coffee and stuff, and you can really kind of go over what you're doing, look at maps and stuff. And usually, if, you know, you bought a meal and stuff, they don't mind if you're sitting there going over the stuff, you know. And a lot of times you'll have Wi-Fi at those places and stuff, too.
Yeah. Well, Eric, let's talk about what you do when you first get to an area. So now you've done your prep work, your scouting, you've got your state picked out, your tag drawn. Now you arrive at the area. What do you do in the first 1 to 2 days you're there?
You know, I really prefer to get to an area a day or two, possibly, if I can afford it, to kind of just drive around and scout, you know, put miles on with the vehicle and kind of scout that way, get a feel for the lay of the land, talk to some locals, local residents, whoever, somebody in a restaurant, and just kind of get an overall feel for the area. I feel like that can be very beneficial. If you're there a day or two prior to opener, or a day or two prior to actually putting boots on the ground and hunting, doing a little scouting on foot, but you have to be careful with the scouting on foot too, because you can blow a lot out of the area that you're intending to hunt. So I would say that's a big one for me. It's just kind of scouting without, being in the woods and just talking to the right people or trying to find the right person to talk to.
I'm kind of not on board with that.
What's your attack?
I want to do a lot of scouting. I want to get there and scout for a couple days, but I want to also be able to jump in a tree the same day. So if it's in season, you can do that. I think if I was going to go and just scout, I'd probably want to do it in spring or months earlier, just so that I had a previous knowledge without screwing it up. But if you're going to scout, and you're going to stay back a little anyways and try to figure something out, I think it's beneficial to have a bow in your hand. Just me personally.
Oh, 100%.
I was thinking about this earlier, and that's why I kind of said that. I'm not calling you out, but I was thinking about somebody I know that hunts there, and I don't want to call him out either. But he's got a channel too, and he goes there like a week before season or a week and a half before season and glasses all the spots until he finds a buck. And then when the season opens, he moves in and hunts that buck. And it just seems to me like then he's in a hurry to leave because he's only got so many days left of his vacation. It's like you can glass him during season too and then move in. You know what I mean? You could, rather than wait. A lot can happen in a week or even a 2 days.
Yeah, and I don't think either way is right or wrong. It's just a different way about going about things. I
think a big part to for your point, I think a big part of it is a lot of people, if they have that bow and they have that tag, feel a lot of pressure to be out there hunting, and then it takes away from their scouting. But I don't really feel that pressure. But I know some people get that. They're like, well, they got to be in a tree because they got a tag and a bow, and they push it too hard. And those people, maybe they do need to scout a few days before the season even opens, because then they don't have that pressure to go hunt or whatever, And you can get it. And another benefit is some of these areas that are very popular, a lot of people show up opening day, and it's good to be able to jump right into the hot stuff. So is that what you think, Eric?
Yeah, I agree with you, Dan. I think a week that's just way too much. That's just a waste of time. I think like a day. If it was 2, maybe 2 is pushing it, but I think a day. I think that's about perfect for me. I do think it's beneficial to try to talk to people in the area, get an idea of the lay of the land before you just jump in there and you blow everything out because you picked a spot on the map that you thought was going to be, just phenomenal, and you're blowing everything out. So just a little more cautious approach the first day, and then get into it. But, think about how you're going to approach that area. Think about the wind. Think about, maybe go check out access to where you want to get to on the map kind of thing.
You make a good point with, you remember we drove all this way and we had this idea on this property. We're like, look at this little isolated public property way off in the middle of nowhere. And we mapped it and we're like, holy cow, does this look good? And it backed up against some really good stuff. And we're like, nobody is going in there because you got to cross this giant deep river. And I'm like, I'm jumping in that river I'm going across because there's going to be bucks on the other side. You can see the layout and stuff. And we drove half a day to get to that spot. And that might even been day one. I think it was. And we get there and it's isolated. It's nowhere near any other public properties. And we get there pushing the time limits. And here's a big sign there that says youth can only hunt there. Didn't say that on Onyx. Didn't say that on Spartan Forge. It didn't say that in the rule book. It didn't say that on the DNR maps. But when you get there, there's a big thing that says you can't hunt there unless you're under the age of 18 years old.
Right.
And then we had to scramble to find a spot.
Yeah, Dan, that's a good point too. Don't rely on whatever. There's a lot of good apps out there. Don't rely only on your navigation or property app, because multiple times now in Montana, they have areas that are restricted for various reasons. I've seen people, usually non-residents, that are unknowingly breaking the law, and I'm not the kind of guy to call them in, but I do tell them like, hey, this property is only ABC or XYZ, and you can't be here right now because it's not allowed. And I show them in the book, and they're like, oh, geez, thanks. But so yeah, do your due diligence. And I think that's one of the main reasons that I call the game warden. I don't call the game warden as much to find out where to hunt. My first question when I call any game warden is, what is the most common reason a non-resident gets in trouble out here? What are they doing that gets them in trouble? What laws are unique to your area that I might not know? And they usually tell you 2 or 3 things that you didn't know. And it's like, oh, okay, good. Thanks a lot. Like, read the rule book too, but those are usually the big hitters. And that phone call can save you a lot of headache.
Good point.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about hunting outside of the rut. I think there's a lot of good opportunities when people think of traveling. I think the majority of people think only of hunting during the rut. So let's start with Eric. Last year, you guys made a trip to the UP late season. There's a prime example. You're going to Nebraska early. So just give me your experiences on maybe the kinds of hunts or the quality of hunts that you've had and why you might travel outside the rut.
I guess I would say that, rut is a great time to kill some good bucks, but there's so many opportunities outside of the rut. Deer are they're moving different throughout the season based on food source, based on pressure, so many things. So the rut is good, but outside of that, you have so many opportunities to kill something. If you put the work into it. Last year, Dan, we went up to the UP, and that was our second year in a row, and this is way outside of the rut. This is, I think, January time frame.
Mm-hmm.
And we're kind of coming up with an inventory of spots to hunt in the UP because we've been doing it for a couple of years now. But last year, Dan came pretty close. He saw a buck, off in the distance, maybe 40 yards or so. I don't recall how big it was or whatever, but you saw some good horns.
Yeah, pretty good one.
The next evening, I had set up on a spot completely blind out of a swamp, and I had a deer come out, very last minute, just like a buck should act. Didn't quite make it to dry ground, and it was right as I was standing up out of my stand. It was maybe a minute after shooting time. This thing took off. I didn't see what it was for certain, but it acted just like a buck acted. And that was January, where everything is typically pretty dead, right? But you can still get onto these deer. There's no question about it. And, it really comes back to, a challenge, trying to kill a buck in January. It's rut, you can kind of sit not anywhere. I mean, you got to have some aptitude for hunting, but it presents new challenges outside of the rut. And that's something I enjoy about that.
I'll chime in real quick. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Dan. Oh, I was going to say, for me, any state that has decent elk hunting is a great state for an early season deer hunt, because 90% of your hunting pressure in September in those states is after chasing elk. So especially if there's good deer hunting that's segregated from the elk areas, maybe the low country instead of the mountains or whatever. For antelope too. If you like to archery hunt and you want to challenge antelope early season, you don't see anybody. Like, I can literally tell you in 5 years, well, I guess I didn't have a tag the first year, 4 years of antelope bow hunting, I can count how many other bow hunters I've seen on one hand. Like, so if you want a hunt that's a fun, challenging hunt with no other hunting pressure and feel like you own the whole state, that's a good one. And the deer hunting the same way. Like, I've run into more deer hunters, but nothing like elk. You see elk hunters all the time. So that's my tip there, is you want to do an early season hunt, maybe look at something in early opener that's got elk.
So what I would say is that rut is a really good time to kill a deer or a big buck and get lucky. But it's not a really good time for a skilled hunter, in my opinion. I know that's going to sound funny, but like when I target places like even spots like, say, Iowa or well-known areas that are known for big bucks, limited draw or whatever, I'm still not targeting exactly rut dates. Because what happens, like when I went to Iowa, first thing this year I went to a whole new area. I've hunted just about every area in Iowa. Now I got down to South Central. And I knew that that's a very, very popular area. So I also know that they got a huge influx of non-residents coming here. And I know all those people are under the same mindset. They got to be there in peak rut. So they check with the biologists. They talk to the locals. They know from experience what dates the rut is. And generally, it's about the first or second week of November. So generally, on the first week of November, people start just piling down there. So what I want to be there is, for a rut hunt, is the week before that, before all those people are there. And what I find is during the rut, those big bucks kind of scatter. They do crazy stuff. They're hard to pattern. They might be out cruising, but there's a lot of hunters. A lot of those deer are dying. You're going to have less and less numbers every day of big bucks. But before that rut, just before, like the week before, you have a lot of deer, mature bucks, that are just starting to get, up and going. And they're not out cruising and stuff, but they are on real good patterns, and they're starting to lay down a lot of sign. So you can walk up to where you look at it as a buck bedding area and find a huge rub line coming out of it that's fresh. He's going to have a billboard saying, "I live right here, and I'm going to come out this evening." So if you understand bedding and stuff and you go into these areas, you can really just walk, and find a buck pretty easy in that week before rut. And there's not very many hunters. When I went that week before rut, I didn't run into hardly any hunters. I ran into hunters, but not near as many as the next week. As soon as that rut came, just like I thought, hunting pressure was 400 times more than it was the week before. And then it got tougher. Then I'd get into areas and I'd be on bucks, but people would show up. I'd be back 3 miles in some of these vast areas, and people would show up. People would walk through. People would stalk hunting. It'd be crazy stuff. You hear people rattling all over the place. I mean, that peak rut time period on public land is hard. Now, if you're on private land, that's a different story. But another thing is if you're after the biggest buck you can kill, rut's about luck. If you have skill, hunting that, in September is a pretty damn good time to shoot giant bucks. And I'm not talking good bucks, I'm talking giants. Good bucks, you're more likely to shoot them during rut. But you look at my resume. I hunt all season, all year, every year. And I kill and see the most bucks during rut. But with that said, the overall majority of deer I've shot over 5 years old are from September.
Yeah, September is underrated for sure. For people that, I lived in Michigan for a long time. A lot of states have October 1st openers. If you've never had a September deer hunt, it's a different animal for sure, and it's a great opportunity.
That's another point is a lot of guys, and you're from Michigan, so you should know this, a lot of guys have that October 1st opening, right?
Yeah.
So if you're big into hunting, why do you want to ruin your season by going away for a week? You can go in September and hunt in a whole other state. So that would be a huge reason. And that's the whole reason we're going to Nebraska in September, me and Eric. Because there's nothing else to hunt at that time frame for us, whitetail wise. So we're going to go someplace in September, and it's not going to affect my hunt in Wisconsin. It's not going to affect my hunt in Kansas. It's not going to affect my hunt in Kentucky, because it's a hunt of its own. It's a whole time frame. So September is a huge time to go hunt without screwing up your own hunt back home. Because what happens a lot of times is we go on these road trips, and what you don't know is I'm monitoring those deer week to week. When you come back a week after hunting, the deer are so different. Every week they change so much. The patterns change so much that you got to find them all over again. You got to figure out what's going on all over again when you get back, when you leave for a week.
I'll let you guys in a secret. Dan and Eric, you guys need to start antelope hunting in Montana, because you can archery antelope hunt opens August 15th every year. So we can push your guys' season 2 weeks earlier even.
I need a little
do
time to get my work done too.
I think we should do that like next year.
Yeah, you'll have to start putting you in for points. I think it might take like 2 years to draw as a non-resident, but we should get you in for actually July 1st. If anybody's interested, July 1st to September 30th is the Montana points only period. So that's coming up. You could buy yourself a bonus. We can buy you a bonus point this year. Yeah, for antelope. Well, we're going to do some questions here, but before we get Ashley back on, let's close out with one more thing. And I just had a couple items that I wrote down for notes here. Things that are easy to forget on your first or maybe first couple out-of-state trips. So what, Dan, if you can think back that long, or Eric, you've traveled quite a bit. What are some of the things you forgot early on and tips you would give people, or what went wrong, things you didn't expect? Let's hit a few of those.
You want to start it off, Dan?
Biggest thing I ever forgot, and the very biggest thing was Ricky. We forgot him once. Okay, sorry. I did go on a trip once. It wasn't really out of state, but it was across Wisconsin, western Wisconsin, and I forgot my release, and that was a pain.
What?
One thing I do to avoid that loss stuff, my critical items go in my vest and are always in my vest. If they come out of my vest, like a release, my bow rope, anything that's my compass, anything that's critical to me goes in that vest and is always there. If it comes out, it goes right back in the same pocket, because I'm not a very organized person. So I make sure that everything that's critical is in that vest, and that vest is always with me.
Yeah. One of the things I'll give you some from my experience is the first time I went on an out-of-state hunt, I this is going to sound like maybe a dumb thing to some people, but I wasn't prepared to bring the meat home. I didn't have a taxidermist lined up. Like, if you're going to hopefully have a successful hunt, if you're not comfortable like caping a deer that you want to mount the face specifically, which is kind of a challenge. I've learned how to do it now over the years, but initially I didn't know what I was doing. And then you get a deer down and you kind of start calling around and nobody's answering their phones because you didn't call them early enough. You know, it's 9 o'clock at night or whatever. Now what do I do with this deer, especially if it's warm out? So it's a good idea. Going back to saving money, one of the things that I would recommend to anybody that intends to travel regularly, spend the money on a decent cooler, like 80 to 100 quart, a big cooler, because one, you can keep all your groceries in there, save you some money from buying stuff ones and twosies at the gas station. And two, if you do get a deer down and you keep your cooler full of ice, if you can't get a hold of anybody to process your deer, or you're going to do it yourself, you can get your deer quartered up and get it on ice right away. So that investment will pay for itself real quick if you travel regularly. And looking into the taxidermy stuff too, that's a big one. I think people don't think about, call and get a quote. What I do now usually is I'll just call around and find somebody that is an experienced taxidermist that can do the cape. So I just take it there, $50, $75, whatever they charge, get it caped, and then you put it on ice till you get home and have your regular guy do it. So those are some things that I'd be looking out for if you're new to travel hunts.
Can I make a comment on that?
Oh yeah. It's your show, Dan. You can do whatever you want.
That's a really good point, because like when I was in Iowa, they would not allow you to bring the deer head out. You could not leave the state with a deer head. You could leave it with a skull cap and antlers, but no, the thing had to be caped, and you could not take the main skull or the brains out.
Right.
And a lot of people were cheating that because they didn't know what to do. But the trouble is, it can be a pretty big offense to take that over a state line, and break that rule. You start getting into some federal stuff that could get you into some trouble. And that's because of their CWD laws. So I basically, when I shot my buck in Iowa this year, I had to go to a taxidermist and pay him to cape it. Yeah. I can cape a deer, but I really didn't want to make any mistakes and screw it up, and I'd rather have a taxidermist do it.
Yeah, and on that front, if you're doing it yourself for just like a skull cap or something, it's a good idea to have some sort of sawzall or handsaw or whatever. One of the things you can do is take a thing of borax with you, which is like laundry detergent. That just dries up any of the meat, and then once it's dry, you can take it to a power washer and spray the skull cap off, and that way you're good. Because someone put in the chat about the CWD laws, and every state's got different laws now, what you can and can't do. So that's another thing to ask if you're making calls to your game warden, ask about the CWD laws and what you're allowed to transport. Some of them want you to have all the bones out. Some of them you can have bone-in meat, but no spinal stuff, no brain. So just do your due diligence there and make sure you don't get yourself in trouble. So, all right, I think Ashley's going to jump back on, and we're going to get into the questions here. So let me bring her back on here. Ashley, when you're ready. There she is. All right. It's all you.
Wasn't happening.
Yeah.
All right. We had a decent amount of questions tonight. One of the first ones is from Steve Denoyer. How do you gauge hunting pressure in a new area out of state?
Eric, you want to hit that one first?
How do you gauge hunting pressure out of state? You know, I had kind of mentioned, you know, my map studying prior to going out of state. And I look for obstacles that people would have a hard time accessing, whether it's long distance or it's, you know, some sort of water boundary to get over. So I'm going to look for a place that's either overlooked or something that's extremely difficult to access. So I try to put myself in a position where I don't expect others to be. Now that can change at any given time. You know, you can get into an area and you find hunter sign all over the place, and you just need to be able to, you know, go to your next spot that you had e-scouted and get over to that spot where you don't expect a lot of pressure. I don't think there's really, you know, aside from the obvious where the parking lots are and that kind of thing, I'm missing something. I don't think there's any really obvious way to gauge exactly what the pressure is going to be like in that specific area.
Right.
So for me, I'm looking at garbage. I'm looking at the setups. I'm looking at cut limbs, things like that. And I am usually not hunting where I find sign. If I find hunter sign, I'm assuming that there could be deer there. There could be good bucks there, but there's probably not a mature buck there. And I feel like in order to shoot mature bucks, to get deer that are in that 5-6 year old range, at least here and there, you have to hunt them. If you start hunting deer, like you start hunting ridges because they're at leeward ridge, start hunting pinch points and stuff because it's good on a map, you're going to have a long and hard seasons. You're going to have it's going to be long times in between mature bucks. You might shoot a lot of 2-year-olds and an occasional 3-year-old, but the mature bucks are going to be hard to kill doing that. You have to get away from sign. So if I'm hitting hunter sign and stuff, I just keep walking. You just keep moving. And that's the hard part on public land. I mean, you can get to the point where you start running out of time, then you got to set up, and it's like, I need to have confidence in a spot that I set up in, and I do not want to be where there's, you know, old cans rotting on the ground, wrappers. I mean, people are slobs. Every place that people get into, you will find sign of them. It's usually when I find those really big bucks, it's a spot where there's no hunter sign. And you just got to keep walking. You can't really gauge it, like Eric said, from a map or anything. You can do what Eric is doing and getting across obstacles and stuff. And he's been very good at that. Better than me because he's got better legs than me. And that guy will go 5 miles across, go hunt some swamp that you're like, really? You're going to get out of that tonight? You know, up in UP or something? I'll do it. He just goes. But you got to get away from people, and whether that's judging where people would go or actually looking at the sign. What do you think, Jeremy?
One of the things I like to do, probably non-conventional with the prep work, is if you're going to a specific property, WMA or whatever, I like to Google it. And the more forum results you find, usually the more people are there. So that's my tip, is to do a little internet research. And the more frequent the name pops up, the more likely there are to be people there. Or along the same front, if it's been, that area has been in a YouTube video recently, like Chris B a couple years ago in Kansas, you probably better forget about that area for 3 to 4 years. I mean, I'm just being honest, right? When stuff like that happens, people learn that it was in area X, and then all of a sudden everybody and their brother is applying and going there. So it's
I don't think anybody ever hunts a tree where I shot a big buck.
Never, right? So yeah. If it's
like
if the area gets out, yeah,
people figure it out. It just turns into Grand Central Station.
Yeah.
So our next question is Public Land Menace, and it says, "Did Eric and Dan record when scouting with the members, and will we see it, or is it something that's private?"
That'll be on members only.
Okay. All right, we'll move on to the next one then. Adam Prince said, "How detrimental are cattle in and around food sources? Not or no, that was a different one, but in and around food sources."
The cattle are in and around food sources, or the
how
deer?
detrimental are like the food sources?
It's I would say it's pretty detrimental, but it's gonna matter on the amount of cattle. Like, I'm sure it's very different out where Jeremy is, in the vast areas where they got cattle over a huge area, than what it is in, say, Wisconsin, or where the cattle are on 200 acres and they have 500 cattle in there when they move them in. Those will just push the deer right out. But I think if it's an open area where they're used to cattle, they'll be in with the cattle, and they will just avoid the cattle. I don't know what deer don't like about cattle, but they don't like being right next to them for some reason. Maybe because the cattle eat it and that's good first. I don't know.
That's one thing I've noticed with hunting and being new to it, is the cattle do not like the deer. They're very skittish of them.
Yeah, out west, Dan, that's something obviously there's in Michigan, it's mostly dairy cattle, so they're confined to the farms. They're not usually on the range, out in the open. Out west, so Kansas, Nebraska, the Dakotas, Montana, where you got a lot of open range cattle. I think you kind of hit one of the main points. There's not as much traditional ag. You don't have as many corn or soybean fields in Montana. And what I've found is that the cattle on range, they're eating all the nutritious plants that the deer would be there for. So I don't know if it's so much that they don't like the cattle, but a lot of times those areas get grazed real heavy, and they're just not there because the food's not there. And if that same property year to year, and I found this to be the case in Kansas, 1 year, if there's not cattle rotating through there, it could be loaded with deer. And the next year, if there's cattle in there and the food's all eaten up, then you won't hardly see a deer in there. So that's one of those things you gotta play on the fly each year, depending on what the situation is.
Just really quick, there's something interesting about that, because there's a significantly sized horse pasture really close, to my town, and I see almost every day deer in there feeding right alongside the horses in a field. So I don't know what the difference is there between cattle and horses. I don't know the answer, but I just find that interesting.
I'm right there with you on that. We have a horse that lives behind us, and that's where the deer bed is, where the horse is. It's the strangest thing ever. Like, they don't behind our house, they don't bed in the wood line, they bed in the horse pasture.
Interesting.
So Steve Denoyer, another question. He said, any public spots you guys avoid from just looking at a map, like whether it's wide open or etc., or are you guys just boots on the ground deciding?
5 minutes out of town, right next to the town limits, I'm avoiding it. Real easy access. You look at it and it's like a square piece of property. Everything's flat. There's no water. Trails through it. A guy could walk the whole thing in 15 minutes. And it's got parking lots. I would avoid that.
If you were a big... Sorry, Dan, go ahead.
I can take a ride around a property and look at it too. And Eric was alluding to that earlier, like getting to a place early and looking at the properties. I'll take drive-bys the properties I see on maps. And if I look at it and it doesn't have cover that a big buck can live on and survive for a year, I'm not hunting there. So what I mean by that is, like, if you take a property and it's dense with cattails and dogwood, and maybe it's got a tamarack swamp that's underwater, but has high spots they can bed in. It's got dogwood and cattails. You take that and compare that to a property that's got a CRP patch and a woods that's a little thicker. I'm not hunting that woods, but I am hunting the stuff with the thick stuff, because especially in areas where they can do gun deer drives, because guys will just go through there and kill everything, but they can't kill everything if it's so thick. Those deer will just run circles around them. So I'm looking for properties where a deer can live to be 5 or 6 years old, whether it's on the neighbor's property or that property, but they can live to it. So big bucks need a certain type of cover to survive to a certain age. So that's why I'm choosing a lot of the properties. But some of that I have to actually drive around the property to determine.
Okay.
What were you saying, Eric?
I don't recall at this point what I was going to say. Oh, what I was going to say was you kind of have to think in terms of if you're a buck yourself and you got an army of guys coming after you, where would you go hide? You know, I was just going to make that statement. I mean, you would find some way where you have some sort of advantage to, you know, monitor what's around you and monitor, you know, the predators coming after you. You're going to try to find some way to survive. And that's basically what these things are doing. You have to think about, Dan says this all the time, you know, they see things, you know, deer smell things. Deer are all things with nose. And if you keep that in mind and think about where you would go, a lot of times that's where you'll find these things, in all honesty.
Alrighty, you got anything on that, Jeremy?
The one thing I would say there, properties that I would avoid, but maybe wouldn't avoid during a certain time of year, and Dan might disagree with this, but I've had some luck here, is if you've got trail camera pictures of a target buck that's only at night that you otherwise might not have a shot at, I will throw a sit at, and this is out west more, where you got more open properties. I will throw a sit at an otherwise garbage looking property where it might be an open field with just a fence row. I might sit there hoping to catch that buck moving, because a lot of times what I've found is those nighttime pictures, those bucks will use those same routes during the rut, but only during peak rut when they're you know, getting off one doe going to a next. So that's kind of a niche situation. But if it looks like garbage, but you got a picture of a decent buck, I might throw 1 or 2 hunts at it during the peak rut.
Gotcha. All right, so Corey B was asking, Dan, what's the furthest and or worst conditions you had to drag a deer out of?
Probably the worst one was I was hunting with Mario on a conservancy, and we had looked at some maps and stuff, and I liked a spot that was about a little over 2 miles from where we could park. And it's not that the next road isn't that far, but the only access we had, that's how we had to go in legally. It was over a 2 mile walk one way to get to the spot. And you had to go through dense swamp, across a creek, and all kinds of nasty stuff. We just decided to do the adventure and try this, and figured nobody else had probably ever hunted that got that far and did that. So we went back there and got into that, and I shot an 8-pointer. It was during youth gun season. I had to wear Blaze Orange, but I shot it with my bow. And then it didn't drop immediately. It took off running, but the arrow looked perfect. I didn't want to ruin Mario's hunt because he wasn't that far from me. So we waited till dark. Mario came over, and then we started searching for this deer, and we couldn't find any blood or anything. But I was like, I know I hit that thing good. And Mario went searching through a swamp, and I went another way, and we were searching for a while, and I just stumbled into the deer dead. It wasn't that far from where I shot it. It had a lot of fat, so it didn't bleed well. So I called Mario over, and now it's pitch black, over an hour after dark, and we're 2 miles from the truck, and through really thick cover that we've only been through once going out there. And I called 2 friends and asked them to meet me at the truck, and we were not going to pack that deer out and our hunting gear. So what we did was field dress the deer and put a jacket over it so coyotes wouldn't eat it. But it's kind of warm. So we headed back to the truck, planning to come back that night still. Got all the way to the truck, and we got lost going back to the truck. There was like a peninsula. You had to hit it just perfect, using a compass and a phone app. And we missed it, and we're wandering around a little aimlessly trying to hit it right. Because if you didn't hit it right, you couldn't penetrate this stuff. And finally we hit it right. So we get to the trucks, get these guys, drop all our gear, drop a lot of clothing, go all the way back out there to get the deer, and had some navigation issues again because of how far it was and how dense it was. Got to the deer and started dragging the deer back. It was a work night. I remember that.
Of course,
And,
right?
Yeah. I remember when we got the deer to the truck was about, I think 45 minutes after sunrise. I was already about 3 hours late for work. I didn't make it into work that day, I don't think. I don't think I did.
All right. So we got time for a couple more.
Let me say one more thing.
Oh, okay.
You know, that might sound a little bad, but but I hear so many people say I won't hunt there because I wouldn't want to drag a deer out of there. If you start thinking like that, you won't kill very many big bucks. I never, ever worry about how I'm going to get a deer out or anything. I don't care at all. And you can ask Eric about this. We got some pretty nasty stuff.
True.
And once it's shot, then we'll have a little meeting. How the hell are we getting this out of here? And we'll figure out a way. And that's the way you got to hunt if you want to shoot big bucks. If you worry about everything that could go wrong or how you could have a problem getting something out, you'll never get anything. I mean, if I have to go back and get a hoist to pull it up a ridge or whatever I got to do, I'm getting it out of there. The good part is most states are starting to let you pack this stuff out now. So you can cut them up if you have to or whatever you got to do. But I never worry about how far back I am or anything like that.
That's for wimps.
Right.
Of course it is. So Sure Guy was asking, he said, are you going to do some hunting, butcher, cook videos in the future?
Say that one more time.
Are you going to do any hunting, butcher, and cooking videos in the future, like the full process?
I don't think I'll be putting any that have butchering in them because every time I do, I get demonetized and they hold it against my account. So I don't want to put any cutting meat in there or field dressing. Unfortunately, I'd love to because I think it would be helpful for a lot of people.
Right.
I can do some cooking videos if I get to it, but I'm not the greatest cook. I pretty much cook the same thing every time, and I've already done that recipe. Bunch of peppers, like 8 pounds of butter, and those things of salt. I put in 1 or 2 of those, and a lot of hot pepper. And then
you ever seen Dan's peanut butter and jelly sandwiches? He usually ends up eating the jelly with a spoon off of the plate.
Needs to have
It's way too much.
Dan, you got a good dashboard corn dog recipe too, I heard.
Oh yeah. We just put them on the dash for like a 3 or 4 days at a hunt.
Yeah.
Then you want to eat them just before they're so bad they get you sick.
You had a cheese dog since?
They get nice and tender. The cheese melts inside of them because we always eat cheese dogs. Hot dogs are gross. But
no way.
Yeah.
That's
remember the hors d'oeuvres?
Those were good. The cheese dogs?
Yeah. Eric wouldn't even try them.
If y'all need a cook, just tell me. I'll come cook for you. It's fine.
We need help. Oh yeah. Anyway,
you guys broke me. Yeah, that's what it's like when guys go hunting. They almost kill themselves the whole time.
yeah.
Yeah.
So Steve Denoyer asked. He said, "So you guys prefer to scout your way in?" I'm assuming as opposed to scouting beforehand, you scout your way in when you're out of state. You don't do prior scouting before that.
I would prefer to do prior scouting, but there usually isn't time. I mean, we run to several states. I mean, we're not going to take a week or a 3-day trip to every state we're going to go to. And a lot of times we don't know which states we're going to go to till towards the end. I would recommend, though, if you know where you're going and you plan on going there, if you can go in the spring, I'd go in the spring and scout. I think you'd be way better off.
Yep.
All right.
But otherwise, yeah, scout our way in.
Okay. Buckslayer was asking, what are some of the most popular or common food sources you found in all of the different states? And he's not talking about like agriculture, like corn and stuff like that, just like plants that are common amongst other states that you've been in.
Yeah, I think early season is always going to be low-lying, semi-wet areas with stinging nettle, jewelweed, and stuff like that. That really watery green plants. They go nuts over those early season. They can be a huge draw. It's like having little food plots in the woods. But sometimes that spreads out across the whole forest too. But other than that, I mean, a lot of times the food sources are kind of hard to determine. Dogwood's a good one. And a lot of the places we go hunt, unfortunately, it's crops, because that's a big draw. But the thing is, they don't just go straight to crops, and everybody thinks that. They really hit those natural things first. So it's really important that you know where the bedding is, but the bedding might be related to those crops, just because that's their end goal is to get to those crops. Dogwood, stinging nettles, and jewelweed are probably three of the top ones, but jewelweed and stinging nettles are pretty much real early in the season.
Eric, have you seen any differences or any other common ones amongst other states that you've been in?
You know, not necessarily, aside from, you know, your general ag. When you're going in for out of state hunt, you have such a short amount of time that you'll get into an area when you're going into scout. Yeah, you're looking for sign, you're looking for rubs, you're looking for tracks, you're looking for scat. A lot of times when I see browse, I just want to be there because I know that's what they're feeding on right now, but you don't always know what that plant is. You know, you just know that they're feeding there, and that's really all you need to know to kill that deer. So I can't specifically point out, you know, something that's hot in this state versus this state. I just know that they're feeding here now, and that's where I want to set up, kind of thing.
Big woods in the north, new growth poplar is really good.
Yeah.
So if they did a clear cut, you got poplar coming in, and you can usually tell poplar. It's got a lighter bark, and it's like smooth barked, and the leaf is really unique if you kind of go look at the pictures of it. But if you got poplar growing in a cut and it's new growth, that is a huge draw. It's like having a cornfield. But it also, most of the time, people that hunted in the Northwoods know that, so it draws people too. So a lot of times you have to find that a ways from the road or something.
Jeremy, have you noticed anything in particular or about what?
I'll give you some mule deer tips for anybody that's thinking about mule deer. Sagebrush is an obvious one, but there's another similar one called bitterbrush, and then snowberry is a good one to look for, because mule deer, at least in Montana, a lot of times you'll see traditional ag fields and the deer will be eating the forbs and the stuff in the field next to it. So they're a lot pickier on the diet as opposed to just eating straight ag. So those are some good ones to look for: snowberry, bitterbrush, and then obviously sage too.
All righty.
You know, in the UP when we were hunting up there, you know what the main browse was? I mean, I forgot all about this, Eric. Maybe you remember this. The main thing that those deer were going to browse on, whether they're bucks, does, whatever.
White cedar.
What'd you say?
White cedar.
Yep. No.
Oh.
Corn piles. Corn pile.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what they browse on.
Yeah.
It was full of corn pile.
Uh-huh.
It really was. I mean, there was so many of them. It was hard to get a natural movement, actually, you know?
Yeah.
All right. We have another one from Adam. It says, Dan, do you think Wisconsin will ever require a point draw to limit out of staters? And do you also think major license fee increase will come with it too?
Do you think Wisconsin will have a draw?
Yeah.
I don't think so. I think they're going to try and continue to do it with, how they do the population control. I don't think they'll ever do a draw. They got a high population. They can keep a high population. They kind of like a lower population, but they're going to fluctuate that population for licenses. And I don't think they ever will, because they really enjoy making money off non-residents. I think there's probably you're gonna see some increases on tags. Matter of fact, I believe it increased this year. I heard some rumors of that, but I haven't actually checked. I believe they increased the price this year. They took away that $80 first year tag, and I think all that went up, but I don't know what it went up to.
I'm glad I got to Wisconsin when I did then, because it was the last year for that, I guess. There was another question, and this will probably be our last question. Where did it go? It was somebody. I lost it, you guys. I'm sorry. I didn't. Okay, Andy Hodell asked, how many sticks of butter do you recommend to cook one backstrap, Dan?
3 boxes. There's usually 4 in a box. It's a lot. A lot.
Listen,
that's what
not cooking like Paula Deen, it ain't good.
Dan, that's not cooking. That's deep frying.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. Sounds like
the trick is to have a little bit of tenderloin with your butter.
I'm the same way. My mother-in-law gives me guff all the time because she says I use too much butter.
You can't go without butter, though.
No.
And Dan? Yes.
Well, hey, Ashley, appreciate you handling the questions. And I want to thank everyone that tuned in. I definitely see some members in the chat. We had thanks to all the members too: Zeke Outdoors, Matthew Wickner, Tim Heath, Nolan Quast, Public Land Menace, Mike Feaster, The Hunting Factor. So got a lot of members. Appreciate everyone, and the support for the channel helps make this and the other videos that Dan does possible. So appreciate that. Dan, turn it over to you if you got anything you want to add before we wrap it up here.
Yeah, I'm glad you called those people out. I really appreciate everybody that has, kicked in to help us, while we're having, issues like everybody is. I mean, this economy is really crashing. Starting to see it all over the place now. Not hearing much on the news yet, but man, you go to get groceries for $800. Everything is hurting, But we're going to continue to keep doing everything we can for everybody, hunt-wise, and these videos and everything. I've got 2 videos coming, one on the members-only channel, one on the regular channel, 2 more scouting videos. And I think I'm going to start wrapping up the scouting and start doing a lot of glassing and stuff. And thanks, everybody.
All right. Well, thanks again for Ashley and Eric for joining us today. We'll be back next week, Tuesday, the usual time. We'll catch everybody then.
Thanks, everybody.